there's all these trees on it and a lot of just like very intricate like scenery aspects to the stone. And that was not where we started. Like I said, we had a Polaroid of a, hazy photo. So
welcome back to the Talk Midland podcast. My name is Logan Richetti with Modern Realty. Today I have a new friend, Jason Patterson with Midland Monuments. And Midland Monuments is what exactly?
We're a granite product provider, mainly specializing in headstone products in the cemeteries. But we do a lot of other things with granite. We can do signage, any like on-site lettering, stuff like that you would see on like subdivision field stones. But we try to specialize in customization for headstone products, so burial products, I guess.
All right. So a couple of years ago, you bought or you're occupying a building on the one-way side of Ashburn. What's the address there?
2510 Ashman.
Okay. And I know that building. I've been in that building before. It seems like a perfect size building for what you do, because you probably don't need a big space. You just need a showroom, a little bit, enough space to show people what you have and what you do.
Yeah.
But let's go through the process of, hopefully, when somebody calls you up, your typical customers, they're probably having a bad day.
So actually what we've been finding a lot of lately is people are calling ahead of death. So that's been a blessing, because I get to sit with a lot of couples and kids where they want to get stuff taken care of for their families, and that more so has been a really continual thing with the headstones. So not necessarily dealing with death, but kind of just preparing ahead of time. But we do get a lot of at need or after passing calls as well. So, yeah.
All right. Well, my parents have gone through this process of preparing for their eventual death, and I admire and respect people who do that, because it's not easy to think about your own demise, and certainly planning for your own death is no fun. But when you have a family and you have other dependents that are going to, outlive you, it's the responsible thing to do to plan for and make arrangements for what happens to you after you die. Now, we're talking about things like a will, a trust. Sometimes, you're unwinding your bank accounts and your holdings and your possessions and all those things, and spelling out who gets what and when and where, but also your final wishes, the things that you want for yourself, whether you want to be buried or cremated or, thrown into the ocean or whatever you want.
Yeah.
But, like my parents bought their cemetery plots a dozen years ago.
Okay.
And so those are pieces of real estate. People don't realize that, but you buy those, right?
Yep.
You're not renting them and giving them back. You're going to be there forever.
Yeah.
So you have to buy space in a cemetery. You also need to buy a headstone.
Yeah.
And you need to buy a casket. You need to, everything that you need to buy and take care of needs to be purchased at some point. It's a transaction.
Yeah.
And so why not handle it before you die, get it out of the way, so you can actually have a little bit of influence on what it looks like, how much you spend and what style you get. Right.
Right.
So I'm interested to hear you say that a lot of people come in ahead of time. I didn't think you were going to say that.
Yeah.
But if you are listening and you're going to die someday, maybe you need to think about getting a headstone, right?
Definitely, yeah.
So would you suggest people, what would you suggest people, at what age or what time frame do they come and talk to you? And how does that work in terms of, can they buy a headstone or reserve one or prepay or finance one, or how does it work?
So the way that we handle those situations is basically you would purchase that headstone ahead of time, and we would actually go out there and install it in their cemetery that they had their arrangements in. It's kind of, to some people that seems a little eerie, but it's actually more so a refreshing thing, especially if you have children, a spouse. It kind of gives you that peace of mind, the same as a life insurance or anything like that. Once you do it and it's done, it's not in the back of your mind when you're driving and get cut off, or in those instances where you're kind of dealing with death in the family. That doesn't necessarily have to weigh on you like that, because you already have it in place. And it is definitely a very responsible and admirable thing. I've gone through both instances personally where I've had family members who had everything done and it was a breeze. Not necessarily that death is a breeze, but more so it's a lot less to deal with when you're grieving on top of that. So,
Well, I've dealt with that many times as a real estate professional, helping families through the loss of somebody's life. Obviously, you got to unwind their estate, their real estate, their houses, things like that. So it's not fun, especially when it's not organized and prepared ahead of time. So one of the things that you can do is, it sounds like you can purchase your headstone, you can have it delivered to your gravesite and installed. Now, obviously, TBD is when you die, right?
yeah,
So do you guys come back out there and engrave on the spot, or how do you finish?
We can do on-site engraving where, and we get a lot of calls for that too. For, hey, can you guys go out and letter my grandpa's stone? He never got his death date, so we can go out there and letter that as well. So.
Okay, so that's something that's done remotely with some kind of a tool. Is it manually done, or is it some kind of robot, or how does that work?
No, I wish. It's sand. So you sandblast into the stone with a stencil over it, and it basically cuts that stone in the places that stencil is removed. And then you, depending on the stone, you would add a paint to it that's monument grade paint, and then it creates that imagery in that sense.
Okay, so that's what's done in the shop normally when you're making one just on a normal day.
Mm-hmm.
You do the same process remotely on the job if necessary, if they're pre-installed. Okay. So what if somebody doesn't have a gravesite yet? Can they still buy a stone and store it somewhere, or do they have to hang on to it?
We don't necessarily store them, and I haven't really found that as a benefit, because when you're buying something and there's no product at the end of that, in a time frame that is mapped out, it can be a scary thing. Like I personally wouldn't want to buy a headstone from somebody who said, "Oh, well, we're gonna take that funding and then when you die, we'll get you a headstone," because
they might not be there.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And then the laws and all of that with that are just a nightmare sometimes. So we always suggest, if you aren't necessarily ready to see that stone out there, it doesn't hurt to still come in. Like, I don't charge people to come in and talk to me, like, and design a stone and visually, like, we do everything digitally. So you'll get to see what that stone will look like. I can give you a printout of it and you can put it in a folder and keep it in your nightstand. So that way, even if something happens and you didn't purchase that, you'll have a roadmap of what to do.
Okay. So this is a pretty good idea. If you don't have a gravesite yet, but one of the things you could do to prepare for your death, when you're doing a will and all the other things you're preparing for that, is you could go into Midland Monuments and you could design your headstone. You could come up with the specs, which I'd like to talk about, the size, the colors, the shapes, the costs. And then you could dial in exactly what you want your headstone to look like and save it in a file there, have a hard copy, print the hard copy out, put it in your folder with your will and your trust and everything else that you have, put it in your safe deposit box. And then when you die, the instructions for your death will include what type of headstone you want. And it's already pre-designed and saved in a file.
Yep.
So your dependents could just go down to the store or call you up and say, hey, I need to call this in.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. And we we save those too. So even if it's like a year or two or something, like, mom's not doing well and we want to prepay that, or pre-design that, I guess. But we're not ready to buy, we save those things in your client file. So that way it might just be, hey, we got to get this going. Can you start that process, and I'll invoice it at that point, and you can meet me when it's convenient for you.
How long does it take from the time you get the invoice to the time it's delivered? I assume that has to be a pretty short turnaround because you need them quick, right?
No. So there's been weird, like, transitional periods in the industry in the last couple of years with COVID, like where most of the stones that were being ordered were taking upwards of a year, if not longer.
Oh, wow.
And then some of the stuff that we do that's a little bit more custom, we spend months going back and forth on designs. I've had instances where families will come up with an idea, but we have to put that into life in a paper format so they can view it and approve it. So that takes a lot of time going back and forth too. If it's something that is stocked and ready to go and we're not working too much on the design, it could be anywhere from 3 to 5 months, but something on the custom end, it could be 8 to 12, sometimes even over a year, depending on how, that design plays out. Like I've had to hire artists to do renditions for headstones that are actually created now and stuff. So some of that stuff, like I said, normally you'd go into a stone company and they'd say, okay, well, what color do you want? What crosses and hearts do you want on it? We try to not go that route. So I will sit with you first and foremost and just talk and basically see what your story is, or what your, loved one's story is, and what they like to do, what their hobbies were. And then I will take all of that information and create a mock-up of a stone based on the information you gave me. And then we would discuss that mock-up and see how close we are to what you had wanted. Sometimes families are like, oh my God, that's, way more than I could have envisioned. It's great. Let's go with it. And sometimes it's like, okay, well, let's change this. Let's work on this. And then I've had instances where they've, other people are involved, even like siblings who need to make a decision for dad's stone. And they kind of have to take that information back to the family, and they can get back with me and let me know what kind of tweaks we need to make to the design. So it's a hard thing to say, okay, this is going to come on this date. It's not one of those products where you anticipate it being here and you give them a timeline. Most of the customers do want to know that information that I deal with, though. So I kind of map out how everything plays into that process, and then give them the understanding of, okay, it might be here around this timeline. Where we might be a little bit further out, we might be a little sooner, but it all, there's a lot of variables with that. So.
Okay. As you're talking, I'm thinking, and I'm realizing I've been to a few funerals, not too many, but I was just at one last year recently, and the headstone isn't there at the funeral. Okay.
Right.
I thought my mind, I'm thinking, wow, that's a long time. But then I realized that the funeral ceremony is for burying the casket, and then it's got to be buried later. They fill it in and whatnot. And then in the short term, you go and visit, and there's just some kind of a stick with a name on it for a while.
Yeah.
And then eventually the stone gets completed and delivered and installed, and then you have it forever from there.
Yep.
Okay. That's interesting.
So that's why, like with your question about, can you do this ahead of time, and how many, and the insight to that, I always say, okay, well, if you've ever been to those services where the instances are, there's no stone there, and you're, a spouse of the deceased, it's like every time you go back to visit and there's no stone there, that can be a daunting thing as well. So it's one of those things where if you are able to do it ahead of time, or have the ability to kind of come up with that design and get it done, that's a nice thing, because it's there at that time of service,
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. So you could even have it theoretically installed before the service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you had it done ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's already there.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're going to go, yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the variables involved in this kind of purchase. You have size, you have stone type, you have customization levels. Where do you start? You start with size, you start with quality, or how does it work?
Like I said, I start with just asking questions and kind of defining each customer as an individual situation. So I don't, excuse me, I don't have binders where you can, flip through and 50,000 images and all of that. I just ask what, their story is, and try to replicate that in a memorialization format. And then from there, that's how we kind of get to that end process of their final design. And a lot of times we end up with a product that is surpassing what they had envisioned, because I'm not just picking generic, things and, hey, here's your 50 different colors. Let's look at them and spend 2 hours figuring out which color, right? I'm asking, do your parents have stones at the cemetery? What colors are you seeing out there that you like? Just questions that kind of define what their overall product should be, I guess.
You ever have any crazy ideas or crazy requests?
Yeah.
Like what?
Let's see. Well, I guess not crazy. every situation that I have, I think is exciting. That's different, like that's where I try to throw myself at the work is anytime somebody has an idea and it's just like off the wall, those are more exciting for me because the end result becomes something that's so unique and cool that I'm happy to be a part of, I guess. So I'm trying to think. Most unique would probably be I had a lady a number of years ago who brought a photo. This is when I was at a cemetery. Brought a Polaroid photo of her son, and it was hazy, and he was on a boat, kind of heading away from shore. Well, he had passed, and we were doing the stone for him. And so we ended up, the end result, which I have on some of my social media accounts and stuff, was this cool colored image of him on a boat driving to the shore. And then like he was kind of another image of him kind of going away from the shore. There's all these trees on it and a lot of just like very intricate like scenery aspects to the stone. And that was not where we started. Like I said, we had a Polaroid of a, hazy photo. So those are probably the more unique things that we deal with. People want, images. We had a call today. A guy wants to do a backdrop of his childhood woods that he used to play in Ohio. So he's going to go down to Ohio, I guess, and take some photos of the woods. And we're going to try to put that together on his stone, I guess. So those, the one-offs I don't think are crazy in my opinion. I think they're exciting. So yeah.
Well, I think, you can, here lies Joe Blow, 1900 to 1990. You can keep it very simple, or you can get a little bit more creative, have a little bit more fun with it. And I assume that this day and age, maybe people are a little bit more, at least my family can make some jokes about this morbid stuff. But I would love to hear more about, people who are taking the opportunity to have some fun with their gravestones. I think I might have a little fun with those.
Oh yeah. Yep. And those are, like I said, those are some of the ones that I'm just like, wow, this is so cool to be a part of, and, one of the ones we just set recently, probably one of my favorite stones, was a lady who lost her husband. He went on hospice and they took him home to the family farm, and she was actually at the farm the morning that he passed and went out on their porch and was having a cup of coffee like they normally would and happened to take a photo. She thought the sunrise was really pretty coming through the trees and just basically, felt the urge to take that photo. And when we started the process of doing a stone design, that was not even mentioned until like 30, 40 minutes into the whole, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And then she asked me like, can you do like full portrait photos? And I said, yeah. And she pulls it up on her phone and we loaded it onto the stone, and it's sitting in Midland City Cemetery, and it's got this massive just sunrise photo coming through. That's, like I said, probably one of my favorite stones. Oh yeah. Yeah. There it is.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And like when you zoom in onto it, it's just like the detail and everything gets more and more, like the grass blades and the way that it reflects. I love it. And the family was actually really awesome to deal with. And like I said, it's probably one of my personal favorites that we've done.
So is that image sketched onto the stone, or is it on some kind of other material that's connected to the stone?
It's laser. It's done with a laser.
Unbelievable.
So it's laser engraved, light scries to create different impact velocities, and then it creates that image.
That's a piece of artwork.
Yeah, I think it's, like I said, I was definitely proud to be a part of it, and the family was just super awesome to deal with, and I got to know the kids and everything. And
so Kay designed that for Eric, and I assume that Kay is still with us because there's no name, there's no death date there. Yeah. So when she passes away, you or your team will go down there and will finalize her date of passing, and then she will be buried with that stone as well.
Yep.
Wow.
Her and her two boys came in and we did that. So.
Wow. That's pretty special.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I didn't realize you could get that kind of detail on a headstone.
Yep.
And so I can see why it takes so long. And I can also understand a little bit more now about why the consultation takes a minute. because this is your legacy, right? This is
Yeah.
this
I
is,
mean, I tell people if they're going to schedule a consultation, set aside an hour at least.
so what I always am fascinated by how people get into the death industry. What do you call it? You
The
said
death care industry.
death care industry. You got healthcare, you have death care. How did you get into the death care industry? What's your background?
I got into it on a whim. So I applied for a cemetery organization, uh, and was a manager of a music store actually before then, just a department thing, and went to the interview, thought it was a joke. Somebody said, you're going to be calling these people and talking to them. And then I tried it and talked to my first family, and we spent like 2.5 hours together. And I just felt like so comfortable in the environment and what I was doing, and what I was standing behind too, I guess. I felt like it actually was meaning something, kind of like if you were trying to find a forever home for a client, and that end result sometimes just gives you chills. You're like, man, I know why I do this, so.
And you're referring to the consultation process of helping a family through the funeral planning?
Yeah, just
Okay.
anything. I mean, anything that we can like sit down and just discuss in this industry. Like I have friends who I've even like sat with for their family members and stuff, and it just, they're like, you don't ever get uncomfortable like talking about this? I'm like, no, I really enjoy it. Like I don't enjoy, that somebody lost their loved one, obviously, but more so just helping them through that process and figuring out how I can play a role in their grieving and assistance.
So if you lose someone unexpectedly and all of a sudden you're thrust into this role of having to manage their passing and all the logistics associated with a funeral and a headstone and all these different things, I would assume one of the first calls that person would make would be to a funeral home. Is that where you start, or
it
the
depends.
morgue?
It depends on where they pass. So if they're passing at home, obviously you're going to call, 911, and then from there, they would release the body to whether it's the hospital or a funeral home for a pickup. If it's in a hospital, kind of the same thing, more so towards the funeral home side, because they're going to ask you, which funeral home are you making the arrangements with? Do you have any arrangements with a funeral home? So generally the funeral homes are getting those points of contacts and meetings first.
Okay. And so then I assume they would refer me to a company like yours when you get to the part of the process where you're picking a headstone, or do they sell headstones too?
They also sell headstones.
Oh, okay.
So
no referrals from them.
I mean, so a lot of monument companies actually are the ones behind the scenes providing the stones for funeral homes.
Oh, okay. So in theory, a funeral homes could be like wholesalers for you, and you deliver. Do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
You do.
Yeah,
Okay,
we have some accounts.
So you support funeral homes and you support these retail.
Yeah.
So you're more of a custom special order monument retail provider. Is that accurate to say? Or at least that's one of the things that you do.
That's one of the things that I like to present our business as, is more of a custom provider for stones.
Yeah.
But
you're not getting that stone that you showed us earlier if you just go to the funeral home. They're gonna give you or they could.
I mean, it depends. If we're the ones behind the scenes that are doing it, that would take, we'd play the middleman and contact back and forth what they want to do and stuff. But a lot of what I'm seeing from the funeral home side isn't necessarily going in that direction, because they have so many other facets of what they do that they're experts in. So some of the funeral homes might be well-versed in headstones, but it's not necessarily to the extent that a monument company would be. So,
okay. So the one that we're looking at now, this is what's going on with this one?
So that one is it's what's called a columbarium, and there's two doors that you'll see with the names and dates on them. Behind those doors is actually an open cavity, and it's a paneled front piece about 2-inch thick granite, and those slot out, and that's what you put your cremains in. So if you were going to be cremated, that's an option that we have for basically a one grave arrangement that you can place, both you and your spouse or whoever into that unit over one grave. So it kind of it lessens the process of having to buy two graves, a big headstone, or whatever, in that sense. Oh, that's the boat one. Yeah, that's super cool.
Okay. All right. So without getting too specific, a generic headstone off the shelf, if you will, very basic, nothing, no fancy bells or whistles.
Mm-hmm.
What is the price range for? I know. Because there's so many sizes and different qualities, but like low end, high end, give me a range, just have an idea. I have no clue. Yeah. $500, $5,000. Where are we?
I mean, even for like a flush stone, with just a name and date, you're probably in the realm of anywhere from like 700 to like 1,500.
Okay.
Sometimes, on like the 2,000, 2,100 side for a flat, but those are, specific colors and different variances. But a standard upright, if you're doing like a gray or black upright, it can be anywhere from 3,500 all the way up to 15,000, 20,000. So
when you're getting into the 15, 20,000, you're getting into these really, really special, really custom ones.
No, not necessarily.
No?
You can keep costs down quite a bit on stones and still do some crazy work. Like
cool.
The one up there, the Batman one, actually was that was a number of years ago, but at the time that was like $6,800 or somewhere in that price point. Now you're probably at like a 9,000 to 11,000 for something like that.
And that's a heavy piece of granite.
Yeah.
Can you pick that up with your arms?
No.
Okay. So this is a substantial piece of granite, and obviously it's been custom cut to the the Batman logo, whatever. And then you inside of the actual front, you have the custom design. So you had to spend time to design it, engineer it, have it be crafted, and then obviously you got to finish it with the engravings, and then it has to be installed.
Yep.
So there's a lot of. It sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but when you really break down all of the elements that go into the product and the delivery of it, it kind of makes sense.
Right. I mean, if you think about the product itself and what material it is, it's granite. So in today's grand scheme of things, if you're getting granite countertops, you're spending, 10 to 12 grand on a mid-sized kitchen, sometimes a lot more, sometimes a little less, but that's an 8-inch thick piece of granite.
So this is one of the things where if you've done well in your life, just buy it yourself so your kids don't have to buy it for you after.
I mean, even if you have a limited means to be able to do something, like I said, I always suggest, even if you're not buying today, come see us and do a mock-up. And I have clients that come in and they'll do a mock-up, and I'll hear from them a year and a half later, and hey, can we come in and get that stone? Sure, for sure, yeah. So
yeah.
But it's nice to be able to know that even if they aren't buying today or even buying from me, they have like this starting point, that they can kind of work off of if something tragic were to happen.
Well, it's kind of morbid. It's kind of sad. It's something that people don't want to think about. But the truth of the matter is, if you decide, if part of your life plan or your death care plan is to be buried in a cemetery, or even cremated but live in a cemetery, be placed in a cemetery, I think it's a great investment to put a little extra money and extra resources and time and creativity and thought into what your headstone looks like, because hopefully, your loved ones, your kids and grandkids or whatever, are going to come and visit you once in a while, and you want to make that experience tangible, and that's a good thing to spend money on since you're going to be dead anyway.
Yeah. I've had people, I can't take it with me, and it's like, but I've had customers that have been very blessed in life and have spent $500,000 on arrangements, like private estates that you see in cemeteries that are their own buildings and stuff. So, it doesn't necessarily matter where you come from or what kind of budget you have. I will always tell somebody to just look into it and see what your options are, because that starting point and knowing that you have somewhere to work off of as far as a stone or casket or your will or anything. I mean, to think ahead on some of those things that can become very burdensome to your family members. It's a powerful thing. So,
Well, if somebody wants to learn more about how to get set up with a monument with you, where do they go?
you can go on our website. We have a inquiry portal that you can fill out your information in. You can stop in, although this time of year we're in and out a lot. So if you miss me at the office, just call our office line and you can schedule an appointment. But the best route is just to call and schedule a consultation and go on that route.
What's the website address?
MidlandMonuments.com.
And the phone number?
989-836-3259.
Jason, thanks for being on the Talk Midland podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.